On April 14th, in 1865, a mysterious man walks up to Abraham Lincoln while he is watching Our American Cousin, which is a popular theater production about an aristocratic English family. But rather than just dapping him up and sitting alongside him to watch this wonderful play, this man pulls out a pistol and blasts a hole into Honest Abe's skull. Oh, poor Honest Abe. But at this very moment, before anyone can react, the audience erupts into laughter. The man then leapt onto stage with a large knife, scaring the brown treasure out of actor Harry Hawk. This mysterious man then ran to the back of the theater where he had apparently left a horse, and then from there he fled to southern Maryland, leading to one of the largest federal manhunts in history. His quick arrival and departure left the audience confused. Most hadn't even processed what had happened. They didn't even know that Abraham Lincoln, their beloved president, had been pew-pewed in the head. Who was this man? His name was John Wilkes Booth. So our boy John Wilkes Booth was the 9th of 10 children, and he was born on May 10th, 1838 as a result of an affair between his father, named Junius Brutus Booth, and his mistress, Mary Ann Holmes. Together, they created an accident named as John Wilkes Booth. So our boy Jdub was actually named after John Wilkes, who was a man so clapped, he was literally known as the ugliest man in Europe. And on top of that, this dude literally wrote freaky poems in his free time. Okay, so luckily, unlike John Wilkes, Jdub Booth was actually not a clapped pervert. He was born to a family of famous actors, he was athletic, he was popular, and he was skilled at horsemanship and fencing. But God had to nerf him somehow, so he nerfed his intelligence. His teachers actually, quote, thought of him not deficient in intelligence, but disinclined to take advantage of the educational opportunities offered to him. So they were basically calling him an idiot, but in a very nice way. But John Wilkes Booth was not lured away by the snow bunnies or disillusioned by his teachers. Instead, my boy was ambitious, and he hoped to follow in the footsteps of his brother and his father, who were both actors. So to help him lock in, Jdub got the most atrocious looking haircut of all time, and he set off to practice acting. He quickly rose up in the ranks of the acting world, partially because of merit, and partially because he had crazy nepo from both his dad and his brother. In fact, at his stage debut, he went 0 for 13 at the 3-point line, and he was booed off court when he forgot his lines. From then on, he developed horrible stage fright. Ironically, whenever he messed up his lines, he actually stole the show, so he became known as like the bumbling, clumsy idiot. I guess from there he became really good at acting, because he somehow locked in and began leading plays such as Hamlet, and he was making over $20,000 a year, which is about $782,000 today. But the bag wasn't the only thing chasing John Wilkes Booth. In fact, the snow bunnies were too. He was receiving daily DMs in Morse code on his telegram, or whatever the people in the 1860s used, and he began to rival his brother in fame. In fact, this man didn't just have snow bunnies chasing him, he had literal grown men too. Civil War reporter / professional meat writer George Alfred Townsend described him as a, quote, muscular, perfect man. Holy glaze. Jdub was actually so famous, at one point he performed for President Abraham Lincoln. And during that play, he shook his finger at Lincoln, and Lincoln's sister-in-law exclaimed, quote, Mr. Lincoln, he looks at you if he meant that for you. And Lincoln responded, quote, he does look pretty sharp at me, doesn't he? Alright, I personally don't believe this, but if it is true, this is like foreshadowing straight out of a movie. Lincoln's son Tad was actually a huge fan of Booth, and was like, please invite him to have dinner with me. But Booth was like, hell nah, because unknown to Lincoln, Booth actually harbored a deep hatred for him. Now you're probably wondering why, right? Abe Lincoln is like the most famous man in America, he's the most powerful one, and he's got all the connections in the world. Well, for one, he had lost hella money investing in oil. He lost about like $6 grand, which is about $200,000 today, and he blamed this on Lincoln. You know what? I think that's an understandable crash out. People today are literally throwing hands over $500 parlays. This is 200 grand we're talking about. 200 grand that he lost. But the second one isn't as relatable, because John Wilkes Booth is actually a massive racist. He actually attended executions of abolitionist leaders, and he even celebrated them. But on top of that, he drafted letters decrying Northern abolitionism and vocally supported Southern secession and slavery. He even leveraged his fame as an actor to travel extensively from the North to the South and back. And he didn't do this to sound like fan mail or as like a booty call. but to actually smuggle an antibiotic drug to help Confederate troops. At this point in the war, the North was incredibly favored to win, and this really made Booth mad, but he didn't even fight. You know why? Because his mom said not to. I would fight, but my mama said I can't fight. Okay bro, we believe you. But he still wanted to do something. Here's a quote to sum up how Booth felt about Lincoln. Quote, "That man's appearance, his pedigree, his coarse low jokes and anecdotes, his vulgar similes, and his policy are a disgrace to the seat he holds. He is made the tool of the North to crush out slavery." Like his idol Brutus, revolting against Caesar, Booth wanted to revolt against the supposedly tyrannical Lincoln by kidnapping him. So, he began formulating a plot to kidnap Lincoln from his summer home. He wanted to smuggle him into Virginia and then ransom him back in exchange for Confederate prisoners of war, an 1860s Lamborghini, and probably a really nice dinner. And on top of this, John Wilkes Booth actually joined the Confederate Secret Service, which was a system of underground spies who smuggled people and relayed messages to each other as far north as Canada. Obviously, being a lazy bum, Booth spent most of his time jerking around instead of actually trying to formulate a plot. So, once Lincoln's re-election rolled around, Booth doubled his efforts to capture the president, and this time, he actually assembled his own motley crew. In this crew of highly trained specialists, it featured David Harold, Lewis Powell, and George Atzerodt. His first chance to actually kill the president came at Lincoln's second inauguration. Here, Booth was brought in as the guest of his secret fiancée, Lucy Hale. Booth even brought his motley crew, but they all got scared of Lincoln's aura and they were dazed by all the women at the party. His second plan was actually at the Soldiers' Home Hospital, where Lincoln was actually scheduled to watch a performance. Booth assembled all his goons along the road leading to the hospital and they waited. If you had guessed that this plan did not work, ding ding ding, you would be right. But it's not for the reason why you think. In fact, it's because the president didn't actually show up to the Soldiers' Home Hospital. It turns out actually, Lincoln had changed his plans, and instead of going to the Soldiers' Home Hospital, he had gone to the National Hotel, which, listen very closely, was the same hotel Booth had been staying at. And guess what? Booth did not capture him. I don't understand how you mess up this badly. Even though the idea is stupid, it's still more feasible than the idea of capturing him alongside the road. After this embarrassing moment, the president actually gave a speech about granting suffrage to former slaves, and Booth got so angry he decided to give up kidnapping and instead just give up in general. Just kidding, he decided to switch to assassination. Not gonna lie, if I was in his shoes, I would just personally give up. If I'm that stupid to the point where I can't even formulate a real idea in my head, and nobody in my life has told me that I'm a genius except this meat-writing historian, then I would think, maybe I am not cut out for this. So on April 14th, in 1865, Booth was informed by one of his friends, who was actually the owner of Ford's Theater, that the president and his wife would be attending the theater with General Ulysses S. Grant. If you don't know who General Ulysses S. Grant is, he was the leader of the Union Army at this time, and he was one of the core reasons why the Union won the war over the Confederacy. And fun fact, he's also on the $50 bill. So from then on, Booth immediately began plotting the assassination of Lincoln and his inner circle. So our megamind genius over here scratches his bum, picks his nose, and thinks for maybe like 3 hours and decides he wants to smoke Secretary of State William Seward, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and General Ulysses S. Grant, all in one swift blow. His rationale was that if he had pew-pewed the president, his immediate 2 successors, and their leading general, the Union would be in a crazy state of panic. This would possibly allow the Confederacy to reorganize and continue and win the war. However, if you've been following along so far, his plan was not perfect. In fact, it was very misinformed and flawed. William Seward was not third in line at the time, because at that time, the President pro tempore of the Senate, who is the most senior member of the majority party, would have been third in line. Wait, I don't even understand how you can make this kind of error. Like, I get nowadays we can just Google or use ChatGPT, but I think he could have just asked one of his smarter friends, be like, hey, who is third in line? And they would have answered correctly. Surprisingly, for the actual pew-pewing, Booth had actually prepared pretty well. He hired a man behind the theater to hold a horse for him so he could escape, and he was actually pretty familiar with the layout of the building in general. So using his knowledge, he was able to create a small hole in the back of the president's box and use this to pinpoint the location of Lincoln. And then he timed his assassination at the perfect point in the play. This was the time when the funniest joke was said and the audience would erupt into laughter. You know what? I'll give him some credit. I'm just surprised that nothing went wrong. Like, I'm very angry that this ended up working out, but if I'm thinking in Booth's shoes, I'm very happy that it worked out, because he was taking some major L's before this. Maybe I spoke too soon, because his other mischievous goons all failed. Secretary of State Seward was bedridden after a carriage accident, and while he was bedridden, he got jumped by this dude who stabbed him over and over again, but he was so bad at his job that he didn't end up finishing the job. The other minion got too scared, or he just did not care, because he literally just drank the whole night and didn't even attempt to go at Andrew Johnson. This is literally the perfect representation of how a group project goes. There's that one dude that does all his stuff, there's that other dude who does his stuff, but he does it so poorly that he has to get everything redone, and then there's the third guy who doesn't do anything at all. Anyways, after Booth's one-sided box fight with Lincoln, he jumps on the stage and yells, quote, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants." Just like Jason Tatum stole the celebration of everybody after winning the NBA Finals, John Wilkes Booth stole this line from Brutus. I swear this guy cannot do anything correctly. Some eyewitnesses claim that Booth snagged his foot on a decorative flag when he jumped on the stage, and that's what broke his foot. Others believe that he fell and he broke his leg. From there, Booth escaped on horseback with his friend David Harold, and he planned to take advantage of Southern Maryland's lack of telegraphs and railroads, and as well as their Confederate sympathizers. He hid in the swamps and forests as cover, and here, Booth met Shrek as well as a doctor who could treat his injured leg. While there are many people today who question Lincoln's purity and how much he actually cared about race and equality, the nation at that time mourned Lincoln's death. At Lincoln's funeral, mourners waited in a line so long it could even rival a line for free boba at a SoCal Asian college. Thousands slept on hotel floors, slept outside, probably slept standing, all to just see Lincoln one last time. Historian Dorothy Cunhart writes, quote, "Almost every family who kept a photograph album on the parlor table owned a likeness of John Wilkes Booth of the famous Booth family of actors. After the assassination, Northerners slid the Booth card out of their albums. Some threw it away, others burned it, and some crumpled it angrily." The funny thing is, even Southerners viewed retribution by Northern states, and even Confederate General Robert E. Lee expressed regret at Lincoln's death by Booth's hand. After reading this in the newspaper and seeing that his biggest idols didn't even like him, Booth said, "For 6 months we had work to capture, but our cause being almost lost, something decisive and great must be done. I struck boldly, and not as the papers say. I can never repent it, though we hated the kill." He continues, "With every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for. And yet, I for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, am looked down upon as a common cutthroat." You did not strike boldly. You literally pew-pewed this guy in the back of the head while he was unarmed and with his wife. This is probably on par with jumping somebody while they are taking a dump in the school bathroom. Sure, it works really well, but there's nothing to brag about. Meanwhile, while Booth is whining, the government locks in. They set up a $100,000 reward for his capture, which is about $2 million in today's money. Then, they send a detachment of over 26 Union soldiers to chase down Booth. Once they make it to Virginia, intelligence officer Conger tracks down various Confederate sympathizers, and using this, they follow a trail up to Booth. They catch him lacking in a barn with his friend David Harold, where Harold would surrender and Booth would be like, "I wanna fight." So the level 50 soldiers throw a Molotov at the barn, it goes ablaze. Booth can't do anything about it, but before they can arrest him, one of the officers claims he sees Booth raising his blaster, and so this officer gives him the Lincoln treatment. As Booth lay there burning and bleeding, the last words to slip out of his lips were, "Tell my mother I died for my country." After Booth had died, his brother Edwin wrote to his family, "Think no more of him as your brother. He is dead to us now. But imagine the boy you loved to be in that better part of his spirit." All of Booth's goons were found, tried, and found guilty, most likely because they were incompetent, but also at the same time because they committed a crime. The doctor who treated him was also sentenced to life, as well as a couple of others, but somehow, they were pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. That's another story. There are a few theories who believe that Booth escaped and that a lookalike was actually killed at the Garrett barn instead. However, many people identified that as Booth, and there was a JWB tattoo on his hand. Many of these theories came from movies and shows like The Lincoln Conspiracy and The Escape. These movies are actually so influential that in 1994, petitioners asked to dig up his grave to verify the body. However, obviously, it was denied.